On today's show, we're starting the prospect pool countdowns for the NHL teams. We're going to be starting with the New York Islanders, the Pittsburgh Penguins, and the Tampa Bay Lightning, all coming up on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hadi joined by Sebastian High, and we are going to be starting throughout the month of August the breakdown of all 32 NHL teams' prospect pools, and we'll be ranking them from 32 to 1 going through the entire month. And we're going to be starting off with the New York Islanders, the Pittsburgh Penguins, and the Tampa Bay Lightning as teams 32 to 30. Not necessarily in that order. We'll check that out together. But Sebastian, how do you want to go about this, and how excited are you to get this started for the month of August? We've got a subject for the entire month, which is very good in terms of continuity, right?
Oh, it's going to help us. It's going to save us some headaches for sure. But I'm looking forward to just kind of delving into every single prospect pool and seeing how the 2023 draft class kind of shifted things, because certain teams that weren't even inside my top 10 prospect pools are now inside my top 3 after a very, very strong draft. So it's going to be a lot of fun to break this down throughout the month. And we'll be doing a bit of a countdown. So we're starting off with the weaker pools, which obviously usually correlate to the contending teams in the NHL for the most part. And I'm looking forward to kind of breaking down some of the hidden gems, because every single prospect pool has some players that are interesting and deserve some attention. So I'm looking forward to kind of piecing together some hidden gems for the first couple teams. And then as we get into the stronger pools, we can focus on some of the really high upside players in the league.
Absolutely. And before we get into that, just make sure to like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Leave us a comment saying what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. It's always very much appreciated. So let's start with, in both our minds, the worst team in the league in terms of prospect pools. I've often called their prospect pool more of a puddle. It's the New York Islanders. Lou Lamoriello hasn't retained a first-round pick since 2019. That's the last time the Islanders picked in the first round, and it's starting to show. I like William Dufault. I like Matthew Maggio. I especially like Hallie Odelius. I especially like Isaiah George. But
love those players.
But are they kind of high-end caliber? And is there any way that the Islanders can work their way forward without a first-round pick? I mean, if they trade their 2024 first round pick, I think they're just going to stay at this bottom of the ranking for the rest of time. I mean, it's just rough right now for the Isles, right?
Yeah, it's a bit painful because they are kind of that one massive exception in terms of this is not a high-end contending team just yet. And the fact that their prospect pool has some interesting depth pieces that in good prospect pools should not crack top 5 rankings for prospects in a pool. Yeah, it's a little bit concerning. Like, again, Hallie Odelius, I think, had a bit of an off year, but this is an intelligent, mobile, puck-moving defenseman. He's quite well-rounded. He needs to kind of step up a couple gears again this season to get back to his trajectory from his draft year season. And Isaiah George is one of my favorite players to watch in the OHL. Incredibly physical, tremendous skater, really intelligent. Offensively gifted in ways that he hasn't really been able to show fully just yet. I'm hoping to see more of that this year, because if it's not starting to show now, I'll be starting to get a little bit more concerned on the offensive projection. But yeah, like William Dufault is a decent player. And then a couple of guys have gotten like some NHL looks already, like Simon Holmstrom, who's okay. This year's picks, 2023 draft class, Danny Nelson is a very straightforward 4th line center projection. And I don't see too much beyond that, which was a strange way of using their highest draft pick this year, considering that this is a pool that only has a couple depth pieces and no one that could move the needle at all, in my view. That spending their highest draft pick this year on a player who I really cannot see cracking a top 9 on an NHL contending team That isn't ideal from my perspective, but definitely some interesting names.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, it's the type of thing where they need to start collecting more picks just to change the mindset of the draft itself, because they're making safe picks every year because they don't have a first rounder and they're just trying to hit on wherever they can find them. But when you have more picks, you can take more risks, and I think that'll change the mindset in New York drastically in terms of who they pick, and that'll improve the prospect pool. My kind of read on a guy like Isaiah George is really just, I mean, everything you mentioned is spot on in terms of the untapped offensive skill, the physicality, but for me, it's especially the stick work with him that'll make him stand out at the next level. He's just a fantastic disruptor of plays, loves to get his stick in lanes and get involved defensively, and he's really good at reading breakouts and finding little lanes to use in order to break out the puck with efficiency and not just kind of dumping it out the first chance he gets. He's pretty raw, but he'll, with enough development, I feel like he can get something really good out of George. For Adelius, for me, it's Kelly Adelius is just a straight up offensive rush player. I love the way that he gets involved in offensive rushes. I love the way that he carries the puck out of the offensive zone. I just have a lot of trouble with his defensive projectability, especially with the views I've gotten in this year with Djurgårdens in the Allsvenskan. At a lower competition level, he was having more trouble, surprisingly, with rush defending, which was very surprising to me. And then you look at a guy like William Dufour, who's a really good offensive mover, a really good kind of spacing type of player in the offensive zone, loves to find those little pockets of space and exploit them. He's got a great shot, but mainly what'll make him work at the next level is how efficiently he's going to be able to find that offensive space. And I feel like he's going to get a great chance of that in the AHL. And he'll be able to work his game up to the NHL level. I'd be very surprised if you get anything more than a third liner out of William Dufour, but at the end of the day, you're getting a really solid one who's going to be able to contribute offensively. Reminds me a bit of Anthony Beauvillier in some areas, minus the playmaking and plus the goal scoring ability. I feel like he's got 20-25 goal potential, but I'd be very surprised if he puts up more than 20 assists at the NHL level. Another guy I want to shout out is Matthew Maggio. I've been really impressed with his tape in the OHL this year. Really, really impressed with his effort level, his intensity, his leadership skills. He's been involved in all three zones regularly, but he's also got the finesse and the offensive sort of intelligence to find space and get that shot off. Kind of a similar profile to Dufour, but for me, he seems a bit more projectable, mainly because of the effort level on all three zones, his ability to read defensive plays and get involved. I mean, yes, he was 20 years old last year in the OHL, but he truly, truly dominated to a point where I don't think it's just a matter of the age. I think he's developed his game in enough ways that he's been very impressive to me. So those are two guys that I think are depth pieces for the Isles, but and same for Odelius, same for Isaiah George. There's nothing that projects as anything, top end. I don't see any top six talent now that they've traded out to Ratu out of the Islanders for Bo Horvat, and especially with the fact that they haven't picked in the first round, like I said, in the last 4 years, it's very rough in terms of how it's looking in the prospect pool for the Islanders.
One last name I'll throw out there before we go to break is Jakub Skarek, the goalie. I think he's a genuinely okay goalie prospect, and I think he's around the same tier of player as the other ones that we've outlined here. So they do at least have one player like for forward, defenseman, and goalie, which we can't say for all the teams we're going to be looking at in the next couple episodes. But yeah, it's kind of slim pickings here.
Absolutely. Now we're going to be moving on to the Tampa Bay Lightning and their prospect pool. But before we get into that, Sebastian, tell us about our sponsor for today's episode.
Take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first betting amount back in free bets, up to $200. That's right. For just $20 of betting, you can get up to $200 back in free bonus bets, which you can spend on anything from money line to over and unders to who you think is going to swing the first home run of a baseball game. All on an app that's safe, secure, easy to use, and when you win, you get your winnings instantly. There's no better place to bet MLB than on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get up to $200 back in free bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball.
All right, so moving on to our second segment, we're going to be talking about the Tampa Bay Lightning's prospect pool. This is a perennial contender. They've sacrificed a lot in order to get to that spot, and it shows. They show up at 31 on our rankings. Now, Tampa has an interesting pool with a couple of interesting kind of high risk, high reward players, some very specialized players in terms of skill set. Let's start at the top here. Do you agree with me in saying that Isaac Howard is probably their best prospect?
It might be Ethan Goetze for me now. And I find it funny that I'm the one saying this because you
I'm
are the
so
big
glad
Goetze
you've come
fan.
around on him. I'm so glad you've come
I
around on
know.
him. It makes me so happy.
Took me some time, but I got there eventually.
Yeah.
I think Isaac Howard had a tough year and is trending a bit downwards. I think in terms of draft year abilities, I probably would have taken Howard over Goetze, but with that last year of development, I'm willing to bet that Goetze is going to not take a step back as a D+1. So I think he'd be my top guy. I think he's a plug and play. I think he could be a plug and play middle six winger, and I think he could play on basically any line and make them better. He's one of the players that one of the reasons I love him so much in Tampa is that he is a player that can adapt to playing with really high skill players and elevate them, kind of like that Michael Bunting type of role. So I find it a bit interesting because they spent like a first, a second, a third, a fourth, and a fifth to get Tanner Jeannot.
Yeah.
And then this 1 second round pick that they got for Ross Colton, in my opinion, is projects better than Jeannot in terms of overall impact. But yeah, I think he's an excellent player, and I think he would edge out Isaac Howard for the top spot on the prospect rankings here.
I'm fine with that. I still think Howard's ceiling is really
higher
enticing.
for sure. It is a lot higher.
Very enticing. Absolutely. But I love what Goetze brings to the game. I've loved what Goetze brings to the game all year, and I had to basically convince you to put him in our top 32. I fought tooth and nail to put him in our top 32. And listen, I it's looking good so far. I really like. I think he's the ultimate line glue player. And Ethan Goetze, you're getting a player who he gels any line he plays with and uplifts the skill set of any player that's on his line. Joshua Roy, with him and without him, there was a drastic difference in production. Ethan Goetze actually produced better without Joshua Roy. When Joshua Roy went to the World Juniors, Goetze produced more points per game, had more chances in the offensive zone. His team had, I think, 85 or 90% of the scoring chances at 5-on-5 without Joshua Roy on his line. It's just insanity what he's able to do. And I feel like at the NHL level, he could be a guy that you just plug on your top line, and he's never going to be he's never going to be the producer on the line. He's probably going to get you 55, 60 points on a top line, but he's going to get your stars 100 points. I mean, he's that type of guy. I love what he brings to the game. So it's very interesting, but it's just outside of that for me for Tampa. I mean, they've got Hugo Alnefeld, who's a pretty good
Dylan Duke, prospect. My boy.
Dylan Duke's also fine. I'm not as sold on them as you are, but yeah, sell him on me.
I like Dylan Duke a lot. In his draft year, he was basically the best player in the draft class as a net front presence, and that was literally it. He had that one skill, and that was everything he was amazing at. And to me, that was worthwhile taking the top 3 rounds. So he was the last player that fell in that 2021 draft that I would have been banging the table for. And I think he's progressed tremendously well at Michigan, which, surprise, surprise, Michigan developed players well. Who would have thought? But he's really diversified his game. He's still a tremendous net front presence, but he's a lot better as a give and go player. He's not the strongest skater, and he's not going to be a big puck carrier that dynamically enters the zone. That's not his game at all. But he plays a gritty and respectable style that I just like a lot. And I think it slots quite seamlessly into a bottom 6. And it really fits what Tampa has been trying to build in their bottom 6 of super high energy, elite forechecking, not necessarily point production. But the nice thing with Dylan Duke is he can be that player at 5-on-5, and then he can be your net front presence on a PP1 or a PP2. And that gives him versatility. And I really like that. Now, I don't think that type of player should be in your top 3 best prospects, which is why Tampa is so low on our rankings here. But I do think he's a really fun prospect that I think that there's a better chance than not that he becomes a good bottom 6 piece.
Yeah, no, absolutely, fully agreed. Yeah, my read on him is just I understand the versatility. For me, I have trouble seeing a defining standout trait that'll make him kind of, if he's not able to skate at an NHL level, if he's not able to keep up with the forechecking pace that's required at the NHL level, what skill can he fall back on in order to be a productive NHLer? I don't really see that. I like the goal scoring, I like the front game, but not to a level where I'm convinced that he's got 20 goal potential. But time will tell with Duke. I think that he's one of the less raw players outside of the NHL for me. He's got the frame, he's got the physicality, he's got the intelligence, the awareness to kind of figure it out at the NHL level, but not in a kind of line defining role for sure. So that's
We're
kind
going
of
to
my
see how he develops in the AHL this year because he signed a ZLC, I
yep.
believe, and I could also see him kind of topping out as an Alex Barré-Boulet, who kind of just like dominates the AHL,
Yep.
and with every NHL opportunity that where you always think like this should be the time it works, it might not, just because the skating, the processing speed might not be quite at the level that they need to be. But as of right now, I'm still kind of hopeful. But we'll see how he produces and continues to improve in the AHL against pro competition.
Absolutely. And one quick shout out to Roman Schmidt, who was a pick that they made a bit high for me
It was a
personally,
high
but
pick, yeah.
yeah, but Schmidt has all the makings of a bottom pair NHL defenseman, which is, I mean, at this point with the core that they have, I'd be very surprised if they start going for the high risk, high reward guys.
Yeah.
So Roman Schmidt he's right in the wheelhouse of what a contender should be making as a pick, especially when your core is locked down for the next 5-6 years. So they're fine with that.
Yeah, two more names I'll bring up. Three actually. They have some interesting depth guys that probably won't make it, but are interesting for various reasons.
Yeah.
Lucas Edmonds, who they picked way too high last year
Yep.
after a massive season of production in Kingston, where he outproduced Shane Wright in his own draft year. But he was 20 years old, and he's a fantastic handler in space, but he struggles in small area scenarios, which is not ideal for a shifty winger who really has no physical game.
Yeah, exactly.
And he struggled in the AHL because it's tough with his style.
Mhm.
Jack Finley and Maxim Groshev are two other players that have some skill and flash some interesting things. I don't know if I'd bet on them, but I wouldn't necessarily bet against them becoming decent AHL guys that can plug holes in the NHL when need be. But I think the fact that we're getting to these players already it tells
Speaks
a
to the
lot.
level.
It speaks to
Yeah.
the level of the Tampa prospect pool. It's not the deepest, but there are a couple interesting names.
Absolutely. Now we're going to be moving on to our third team in the top 32 prospect pools. The team that's at 30, which is the Pittsburgh Penguins. We'll get to that right after our messages. All right, so moving on to our third segment and the team number 30 in our prospect pool rankings, we're going to be talking about the Pittsburgh Penguins. Now, the Penguins picked at 14th overall in last year's draft, made a decent-ish selection, but I think it's way too high for my liking. In Braden Yeager at
I agree.
14 is, man, I
It's a
I
risk.
think there was a slight there was a slight overcorrection with Yeager in my personal opinion. I think that yes, he had an off year, and yes, it wasn't to the level that you could have appreciated out of a Yeager who last year looked like a surefire kind of top 5 guy. But still, I feel like seeing him outside a lot of first rounds in the mid seconds on some rankings, I was kind of astounded because he's got fantastic goal scoring ability. He's improved
I
his
had him outside the
playmaking
top
ability.
32.
Yeah,
I'm
that was
among
kind of
those.
my that
I
was kind of
know.
the alley post setting up for you. I wanted you to talk about that and kind of rationalize that for me.
I mean, I had him at 39, which is harsh. I think
Yeah.
I think my issue is I don't see him as a very projectable player as he's currently constructed. He is not he's not very inside driven. He has a real lack of a physical game. When the style he plays, in order to translate to the NHL, will require a strong physical foundation. I just haven't seen that at all. Whereas
Yeah.
other players with weaker physical games like Jaden Perron and Andrew Crystal, you see adaptive tools to get around that. And I don't really see that with Jaeger. He's a decent off-puck player, but on the puck, I find him quite limited. He's not the greatest handler. He's not very deceptive. He's not overly physical. I think he's a decent processor of the game, but I don't think it's really a separating tool. He has an amazing shot, and he's really worked on his playmaking. Those are two really clear strengths for sure. And like, there's a reason I still had him ranked top 40. Like, I think there's some really good tools there.
Yeah.
That said, the defensive game took some big steps back last season in my viewings. I thought that Jagger Firkus was really the offensive driver, even Denton Matejchuk still when they were on the ice together. And that Jaeger is a good, he connects play decently well. He can connect his wingers pretty decently. I think there's a decent chance that you're getting a 3C out of this. I'm just a bit skeptical still of picking that type of player 14th overall, especially when it's a player that in my mind projects as a middle six piece at best, who also isn't projectable. For me, I think I would prefer it if they would have gone for a guy like Samuel Honzek in this slot, where you get perhaps a similar ceiling, but way more certainty, and in my opinion, way more intriguing tools, and a lot more options for development staff to kind of mold a player in any way that they want to. With Jaeger, you have to get him to build on his physical game and double down on the goal scoring and the playmaking, and then you might get a guy that can score you 30 goals and 30 assists, maybe, if you're playing with the ghost of Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin in a couple of years. Like, maybe, but I have some doubts. That said, he is the best player, the best prospect that we have looked at in this episode, and there's a reason that we have Pittsburgh ahead of the Islanders and the Lightning, because Jaeger is a legitimate first round caliber talent. I'm ranked 39th, but he was the last player in my tier that was going way up into my first round. So I do think he's a first round caliber player. But I have a lot of doubts. But that's my take on Jaeger.
Yeah, no, I fully understand where you're coming from there. I just feel that I always kind of look with a bit of tentativeness. It's the same with Cam Allen. To players that had a big regression in their draft year, and especially when it comes to their defensive awareness, their decision making. With Jaeger, I felt like there was a lot of frustration this year. There was a lot of rush decisions and trying too much to impress in his draft year, which is a bit of the same feeling I got out of Cam Allen every time I watched him. But I feel like Cam Allen gave me a bit more headaches when I watched him. That's why I had him ranked lower.
For sure.
I still had Jaeger in the kind of 26 to 28, 29 range in my personal rankings.
That's a totally fine range for him.
And that's definitely fair. It's just like, still 14 is high. Like, even for me, who's higher on him than you are, I still feel like 14 was way too high based on where I would have taken Jaeger. I have the same concerns regarding the defensive acumen and the decision making and the on puck game. I feel like his skating needs to come a couple ways as well. But for me, it's just his off puck game is so solid in the offensive zone. I have a very hard time naming you a better finder of space in the offensive zone. Like, he's so good at finding those little pockets, hitting him at the right times. I like that. I love that element of his game. And it's just, I'm not convinced that dropping him outside of the first round is warranted, even though we both agree he had a very big regression in this draft year. I still think there are some elements of his game that are solid enough, and especially the improvements in his playmaking, which you don't see often in goal scorers. That gives promise. I like to see a player who's able to develop areas of his game that aren't as recurrent in their play style. It's not like he is facing a lot of playmaking scenarios as a goal scorer, as a triggerman on the power play. He's seeking those scenarios, which is what I like to see out of a prospect. Is he seeking the scenarios that he doesn't see often in order to improve those areas of his game? And Jaeger definitely was, even though defensively it was a headache this year. But I mean, Cam Allen was as well, and he fell into the 150s, and Brady Jaeger was picked 14. Was it 136? I think that Allen was picked.
I think it was 146 or 136, something like that. The Capitals got a bit of a steal on Cam Allen, but there are a couple other interesting names with Pittsburgh. It's not just the Brady Jaeger pool. I thought Owen Pickering was a good pick last year in terms of an upside bet. Really toolsy. Kind of just the better version of Caden Price from this past draft, in my opinion, of similarly very raw, but some really nice flashes of tools.
I think he
Big left
grew a
shot
foot.
defenseman.
I think he
Oh
grew a
my
foot
god,
in his draft
yeah.
year or something like that.
Well,
So
it
very
wasn't his
lanky.
draft year.
So
It was between like the ages of 15 and 16. I think he gained like 12 inches or 11 inches in height, and he just entirely had to change the way he played because his
Yep.
entire hockey career he was the undersized defenseman, and then all of a sudden he's like what 6'3", 6'4".
Yeah.
You have to adapt to it, right? Like there's definitely differences there, but I didn't watch too much of him as a D+1. What I did see was good, but I can't give too much info in terms of D+1 viewings because they were only in passing,
Yeah.
and there's little other reason to watch Swift Current in the WHL.
Agreed fully. I do want to give a quick shout out to Emil Yarvanti, our old European scouts favorite. I mean, he loves him, right? He just absolutely adores A2 Sultanen.
Totally
If you're
not
listening to this,
totally not DND on E2 Siltanen's rankings since
Yeah.
September. Totally not happening.
I think A2 Sultanen,
early.
our European scout, put him as a do not draft in September, which is just absurd.
It was funny,
But I do
it
like
was
the
entertaining.
Absolutely. I like the Zam Plant pick personally. I really like that
Yeah.
pick for you. He's playing in UMD right now and is probably going to continue developing his game, but a very fun, very skillful player, and that's what I like to see in teams that are contending and have an aging core, have guys who are going to be retiring soon. Wink, wink, Sidney Crosby. I like to see those kind of bets. And then I liked but didn't love the Cali Kangas pick. It was a decent bet on a guy who is a very specialized player, not necessarily kind of the type of guy who you can plug in any role, and he's a very specified role, but decent enough that you can take that bet. Outside of that, though,
Couple
not much you
names.
can.
I mean,
Tristan
Semred
Bras is
Poulin,
fine. Yeah.
Tristan Bras is fine. I like Lucas Fejkovsky, who just had his first season in the AHL. He to me could be like the next Matthew Phillips in terms of an undersized, skilled guy that should get NHL shots but doesn't. But I loved him in the WHL. He's just an electrifying player, great handler. But in terms of NHL upside, it's more the fun factor than the projectability. Do we count Ty Smith as a prospect, considering he played in the AHL last year? I don't know.
I mean, he played enough NHL games that I don't think
he's played over 100, I think.
And even then, I still have my doubts about Smith based on. I mean,
Yeah.
he's good at what he does, but he does one thing, and it's just I like the offensive movement at the blue line. I like the way that he's able to open up shooting lanes and pass, as a power play quarterback. But I don't think he has enough surrounding skill in order to become a top power play quarterback, which is where he would excel. It's just it's especially rush defending and in the defensive zone. It's a headache. I'm not convinced of Ty Smith's kind of top 4 potential. His rush defending and in zone defending would need to come a good 3-4 steps, and he's already 23.
Yeah, he's getting up there in age in terms of prospects.
So, not entirely sold. But
one last guy I'll throw out there is Joel Blomqvist. I think he's a good goalie prospect. So
as a goalie prospect, he's up there in terms of the best. Personally, I like him a lot. But those are the reasons why we have Pittsburgh at 30 rather than 31 or 32. It's just they have enough decent pieces. They have the best prospect out of the 3 that we've mentioned so far, and they've also got a very decent goalie. Yeah, and also a very good goalie prospect, which helps a lot.
For sure.
But that wraps things up for today's episode. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment saying who you want us to talk about next, which team you support and are excited to hear us talk about. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all the news from the recent kind of sporting events, letting you know what's going on in the sporting world. And make sure to tune in for our episode on Wednesday, where we'll be breaking down teams 29 to 27. We won't tease you on the names of those teams. You'll have to tune in for that. But this has been Hadi Kalakesh with Sebastian Hai, and we hope you tune in next time.